I'm reminded of one of our speakers at one of the networks, can't remember which one, being in a very similar situation, having to say to two senior leaders, look, I'm not your dad, which was sort of half comical, but half reflected the kind of position that was sort of been put in me.
Yeah.
Jackie. Over to you,
Thanks,
Jackie.
Richard.
Sorry.
Hi, John.
Hello.
John, just building on Jen's point at the beginning, and I know you said that you don't use any form of psychometric tests,
Yeah.
but I'm just interested, when you have those first initial one-to-one conversations and you outline the sort of questions that you ask, how far do you go in exploring? So if you sort of think about perceptual positions, how much do you explore the perceptions of the other party when you're having that initial sort of one-to-one? So you're exploring sort of what's going on for them and what they'd want to have happen and all those things. Do you get them to a position where they try and put themselves in that other person's shoes and explore that one-to-one?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I usually say to them, if we think about the difference between intention and impact, you've talked to me about the impact that your colleagues' behaviour is having on you, but what's their intention, do you think? What's their intention? And I do that partly because it starts to bring people together. If there's some genuine understanding of where the other person's coming from, that's helpful. But it also helps me tease out whether or not I'm dealing with somebody who takes no responsibility for the situation whatsoever. Yeah. I don't explore it too far. I'm there to mediate, and we will move at pace. But it's always helpful to get the perception of one party's view of the other party and what's driving their behaviour.
Have you ever had any sort of people that have had light bulb moments that have decided that they don't necessarily need to progress with the mediation process because they've suddenly had this, epiphany of understanding what's going on for someone else, and they maybe feel empowered to go and have those conversations
and have a conversation
themselves?
Yeah. Or they think, actually, I'm in the wrong organisation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens. And then, I said, normally the joint meeting is 2 to 3 hours. I did one a while back with a couple of really senior bankers, and it took about 20 minutes. And there was a sort of, maybe about 2 minutes in, there seemed to me to be a joint epiphany, as it were, and I became invisible. They started to talk to each other like adults. And I sort of completely disappeared, which is always my objective, really. I shouldn't, I actually don't need to be there. So if I don't need to be there, then I could just shut up. So that there seemed to be something almost magical happened right there. And at the end of it, I said, I don't need to be here. And I don't think we need to document anything. It's unusual. The two of you just need to get on with it. And crucially, they agreed that the next time they had a dispute, they'd go and have a cup of coffee together or a walk around. I think one of them was a smoker. They'd walk around the block, he'd smoke, they'd talk, they'd go back because prior to that, they'd been sending really shitty, forgive my language, really inappropriate emails to each other and escalating it all over the bank. Internationally, one of them had a sort of full-time job of making allegations about his colleague that went all sorts of places. But they sorted it. So sometimes the magic happens. Less often than I would like.
That's a great question, Jackie. Before I come to Sarah, John, quick question. Someone told me recently that if you're walking along next to each other, technically it works better as a conversation. You heard that? Yeah, Jackie, looks like you've heard this, as opposed to sitting face to face. Apparently it's a technique it's worth using with teenagers together.
Yeah, I sometimes suggest to people that we go for a walk, and that helps, or sitting on a park bench. Yeah, sometimes that helps, but it's also just nice to get into a room and sit with people. And oftentimes, if I think of my own experience, the room sort of disappears, and you're just having a conversation. But I mean, I will go for a walk, or I'll choose my location carefully, given the building site experience. But I will go for a walk. And oftentimes I'm mediating in and around the River Thames, and it just seems to be helpful to get people next to water.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Jackie, you look like you were going to come in there briefly on the standing next to each other point, or maybe not.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, which I think there's something about that when you haven't got that intense eye contact that allows people to feel sort of less threatened and are just, you know, more able to explore their sort of map of the world. As Jen says, when there's not that intense focused gaze on each other. So yeah, I've heard that a lot as well, that's much more effective than sat in that room where you're just focused on each other, and you've got that visual connection. There's something about being able to look elsewhere and not directly at each other that's more powerful and productive.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
Let's go to Sarah, then Annika, and then we'll finish in 2-3 minutes. Sarah, thanks for waiting. Sorry.
Hi, thanks, John. This has been really useful. I trained as a mediator last year, actually, and that tip on having a sponsor we didn't really cover, so that's really useful. But I guess my question is, we've got more grievances than ever at the moment in our organisation because we've just gone through a big change process. But based on what you're saying, and my opinion also is, surely grievances, you shouldn't even have a policy, really. We should be moving more to a resolution type policy first.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you've seen organisations where you've been mediating, kind of trying to move away from that, because where we, and my colleague Lou is on here as well, that's our thinking around it. Take it out, because a bit like, you know, someone was saying earlier, people just then use it all the time. They're raising grievances just because they're fed up with Johnny over there, and they actually, it could have just been a conversation. So yeah, I just wonder if you're seeing people moving more to resolution and moving away from grievances.
Yeah. And a very good question, Sarah, and thank you. Yes, I am. And it's sort of moved from the public sector, where it's been in place for some time, into the private sector, really quite swiftly and imaginatively in a number of cases I can think of, where it's seen as a precursor to grievances, and folks are almost obliged to mediate before they hit the grievance button, although they can default to the grievance whenever they wish. And I had a sort of moment when I come to realise that things had changed, because I was invited to contribute to a seminar run by one of the big law firms. And the attendees were in-house general counsel who had come along to talk about mediation as a means of resolving disputes. Now, 5 to 10 years ago, that audience would have been pretty slim, if not non-existent. So there are changes afoot, and there are some really clever, well-documented examples of organisations moving in that direction. And my favourite one, because it's so counterintuitive, is Air France. They've done a great job of using in-house mediation as a means of resolving disputes, having been dragged in front of the European court for a dispute, a bonus dispute that was worth €50 or something. They decided that we're going to have to do something different, and they did, and it's working. So really good question, and I encourage you to get on with it and make it happen, because you're right. If it's just a disagreement with Johnny, there's no earthly reason why that should be a grievance. And you know, once the in-house lawyers or your legal advisors have crawled all over the final document that goes out in response to a grievance, nobody's going to be happy. So you're guaranteed of delivering unhappiness after a 6-month delay. I mean, that's more or less what you're doing. And that, you know, that's no good for anybody. The only people that benefit, once again, are people like me that get paid to come in and hear them, and the lawyers.
Thanks,
There's
John.
no benefit whatsoever.
And if that's not on your website, it should be. Guaranteed happiness in 6 months, all your money back. Annika, to close, thank you.
I will be very quick because I know we're at time. I think I just had 2 comments. Certainly my experience has been at previous organizations where I've worked that we develop policies that in very careful language sort of asked people to go through a resolution process first. But we had trained up business people to be mediators so that when that gets mediated, it's not from within HR, just to kind of dilute that responsibility a bit to make it a shared business problem. The second thing I was just quickly going to add for the eye contact is that I've actually had feedback from 2 of my team members where one prefers it and one hates it. And this only came out because we were having this honest kind of team session about what works and what doesn't. And they alerted me to the fact that we have people processing in various styles, audio, kinesthetic or visual. And so depending on their processing kind of preference, we've started sharing things in the team differently. So I'm taking away from this that if I ever had to do a mediation again, I would probably sit them next to each other, then across from each other, and ask them then in one-to-one sessions what felt better.
Good. No,
That's two excellent points.
Very good. And on your first point, I think it's great that you're using in-house people to be mediators, because there's always fantastic people in the business, as it were, or in the organisation who've got those sorts of skills. You just need to find them and train them, and then set them loose. And on the second point about eye contact, I need to reflect on this, because I just have a preference for sitting with people, to be honest. And I think I get a bit of credit because I'm old and haggard and all the rest of it, and I walk in and people immediately feel calmer, but I need to think about this eye contact a bit more, because I will look and I'm very comfortable with silence, whereas people might feel that uncomfortable, particularly if eye contact is maintained. So thank you for that. But thank you for both points, Annika.
Yeah, thanks, Annika. They're two excellent points, and Jen's just added that as well. Neurodiverse people, particularly autistic people, don't find eye contact easy at all. Describes as looking at the sun. So nice. Yeah, okay, that's a good thing to bear in mind. John, fantastic. Love the way you articulate this. Really, really useful session. Lovely to see everyone. John doesn't know I'm going to do this, but I'm going to plug his book. He's written a book, To the Woods, A Journey Through the Appalachian Trails.
Appalachian.
Thank you. Sorry, anyway, it's great fun, even if I can't pronounce it. I bet you can. And it's really good fun and really interesting as well. Lovely having you along, John. Lovely to see everybody. The recording will be with you shortly. And thank you ever so much for coming. We'll see you again soon. John, stay on for some feedback. Please do leave us some feedback.
Thank you. Bye.